The screams echoed through the canyon like the wails of the damned. Fire danced against stone walls as shadows moved with predatory grace beyond the orange glow. She pressed her trembling hands against the cold rock, feeling the vibrations of massive paws striking the earth. The smell of blood hung thick in the air, her family's blood. 6 million years ago, when the world belonged to monsters larger than nightmares, survival meant more than finding food or shelter. It meant outrunning death itself. Tonight, death had come hunting, and it was hungry. The female Homo habilis named Kira crouched at the cave entrance, her dark eyes scanning the twilight horizon. The dying sun painted the savanna in shades of crimson, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe and pulse with malevolent life. Her callous fingers gripped a crude stone axe, knuckles white with tension. "They're coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that howled through the rocky outcroppings. Behind her, the cave breathed with the soft sound of her clan 12 souls huddled around a flickering fire, their faces etched with the permanent lines of perpetual fear. The scent hit her first. Musk, blood, predator. It was a smell that spoke of death, of creatures so massive and ruthless that even the mighty mammoths fled from their approach. Her nostrils flared as she recognized the distinctive odor of the pack hunters, the ones her people called shadow claws, beasts that stood taller than 2 men and possessed jaws capable of crushing bone with a single bite. "Kira," came a hoarse whisper from behind. It was Grok, the clan's elder, his weathered face illuminated by the firelight. The children they sense it too. She turned to see the youngest members of their group cowering behind the adults, their wide eyes reflecting the flames like trapped stars. Little Oma, barely 3 winters old, whimpered softly as she clung to her mother's leg. The ground trembled. It started as a subtle vibration, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. But within moments, it intensified into rhythmic thuds that seemed to shake the very foundations of their refuge. Dust rained from the cave ceiling as the footsteps grew closer. Thud, thud. How many? Grok's voice cracked with age and terror. Kira closed her eyes, listening to the pattern of the approaching steps. Her father had taught her this skill to count predators by their gait, to distinguish between a lone hunter and a coordinated pack. The knowledge had kept their bloodline alive for generations. 5, she breathed. Maybe 6. The fire behind them crackled and hissed, sending sparks spiraling toward the cave mouth. In the dancing light, she could see the sweat beading on her clanmates' foreheads, the way their hands shook as they clutched their primitive weapons, stone knives, wooden spears, clubs carved from mammoth bone. Pathetic tools against the monsters that stalked them. A low growl rumbled through the night, so deep and resonant that it seemed to come from the bowels of the earth. The sound raised every hair on Kira's body, triggering ancient instincts that screamed at her to run, to hide, to submit to the apex predators that ruled this merciless world. But there was nowhere to run. The cave was a trap, a dead end, carved into the cliff face with only one entrance. They had chosen it for protection from the elements, not realizing they had sealed themselves into what might become their tomb. Another growl answered the first, then another. The pack was communicating, coordinating their approach with an intelligence that chilled Kira's blood. These weren't mindless beasts driven by hunger alone. They were tactical hunters, capable of strategy and patience. "The fire," she commanded, her voice cutting through the clan's terrified murmurs. "Make it bigger, now." Her people scrambled to obey, feeding branches and dried grass to the flames until the cavern blazed with orange light. The fire was their only advantage. Most predators feared it instinctively, their primitive brains associating the bright tongues of flame with forest fires and destruction. But would it be enough? Outside, the footsteps had stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the approaching thunder of paws against earth. In the quiet, Kira could hear her own heartbeat, rapid and desperate, matching the rhythm of her clan's panicked breathing. Then she saw them. Eyes, glowing like molten amber in the darkness beyond their fire's reach. They appeared one by one, forming a semicircle around the cave entrance predator eyes that reflected light with the cold intelligence of apex hunters. The shadow claws had arrived. The largest pair of eyes belonged to the alpha creature, so massive that even crouched in the shadows, its silhouette towered above the others. Kira estimated its height at nearly 8 feet when standing, with shoulders broad enough to block out the stars. Its breathing was audible even from 30 paces away, a low rumble that spoke of lungs capable of sustaining a chase across endless miles. "Don't move," she whispered to her clan. "Don't even breathe loud." But her words came too late. Little Oma, overcome by terror, released a high-pitched wail that pierced the night like a blade. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying into a chorus of fear that seemed to announce their presence to every predator within miles. The eyes shifted, focused. The pack had their target confirmed. The alpha stepped forward, and for the first time, Kira saw the full horror of what hunted them. Its fur was dark as midnight, mottled with scars from countless battles. Its massive head was elongated like a wolf, but larger, much larger, with ears that swiveled independently to track the slightest sound. But it was the teeth that made her blood freeze. Ivory daggers as long as her fingers, designed to tear through flesh and crush bone with mechanical efficiency. Saber-fanged death, Grok breathed beside her, using the ancient name their ancestors had given to these creatures. The last time they came, half our tribe died. The alpha's lips peeled back in what might have been a snarl or a grin, revealing more of those nightmare teeth. It was close enough now that Kira could see the intelligence burning in its amber eyes. Not the simple hunger of a wild animal, but the calculating awareness of a creature that understood strategy, patience, and the art of psychological warfare. Behind the alpha, its packmates fanned out with practiced precision. 2 moved to the left side of the cave mouth, 2 to the right. The formation was deliberate. They were cutting off any possibility of escape while leaving their leader a clear path to the entrance. "The spears," Kira commanded, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "Form a line behind the fire." Her clan obeyed with the desperate efficiency of those who knew death was imminent. Grok, despite his age, stood tall with a mammoth-boned spear clutched in his gnarled hands. Beside him, Thok and Urg, the clan's 2 remaining adult males, raised their weapons with grim determination. Even the women joined the defensive line, their stone knives gleaming in the firelight. The alpha tilted its massive head, studying their formation with what seemed like amusement. It had seen this before, the pathetic defiance of prey animals in their final moments. The creature took another step forward, its enormous paw making no sound despite its weight. Then it spoke. Not in words, of course, but in a sound that froze every soul in that cave. It was a vocalization unlike anything in nature, part howl, part growl, part something else entirely. The sound seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the most primitive part of the human brain, the ancient fear center that recognized the call of an apex predator. The other pack members answered in unison, creating a symphony of terror that echoed through the canyon. The harmony was perfect. Practice these creatures had hunted together before, had refined their psychological warfare over countless kills. One of the women behind Kira whimpered and took a step backward. Then another. The formation began to waver as primal instinct warred with desperate courage. "Hold!" Kira shouted, but she could feel her own resolve cracking. The alpha's eyes seemed to bore into her soul, reading her thoughts, measuring her will. It knew she was the leader, the one whose breaking would shatter the entire group's resistance. The creature lowered its head and began to pace back and forth at the very edge of the firelight, never taking its eyes off her. Its movement was hypnotic, predatory like a cat toying with a trapped mouse. With each pass, it edged slightly closer, testing the boundaries of their defenses. Suddenly, one of the pack members, a scarred female slightly smaller than the alpha, darted forward. Not a full attack, just a feint designed to test their reactions. Several humans jerked backward, spears wavering, and Kira heard little Oma's terrified sobbing intensify. The predators had learned their lesson. The humans were afraid. More importantly, they were breaking. The alpha's lips curled again in that terrible, almost smile. It was time for the real hunt to begin. The attack came without warning. The scarred female who had made the feint suddenly lunged forward with explosive power, her massive form launching through the air like a nightmare made flesh. She struck the left side of their defensive line, targeting Erg, whose spear trembled in his inexperienced hands. Kira screamed a warning, but it was too late. The predator's jaws clamped down on Erg's shoulder with a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. His agonized shriek filled the cave as he was yanked forward, his spear clattering uselessly against the stone floor. Now, Kira roared, diving toward the struggling pair with her stone axe raised high. She brought the weapon down with desperate strength, feeling it bite deep into the creature's flank. Black blood sprayed across the cave wall as the predator released Erg with a snarl of pain and rage. But the damage was done. Erg collapsed, clutching his mangled shoulder as crimson life poured between his fingers. The defensive line had been broken, and now the other pack members surged forward like a dark tide. Chaos erupted in the confined space of the cave. Spears jabbed wildly at moving shadows, while claws raked across human flesh. The fire, disturbed by the frantic movement, sent showers of sparks in every direction, some catching on clothing and fur alike. Grok thrust his mammoth-bone spear at the alpha, but the massive creature moved with surprising agility, twisting aside and snapping the weapon in half with a casual bite. The elder stumbled backward, defenseless, as death approached on silent paws. Kira threw herself between them, swinging her axe in a wide arc that forced the alpha to retreat a step. For a moment, predator and prey faced each other in the flickering light, both breathing hard, both recognizing the other as a worthy opponent. "You want me?" she gasped, tasting blood in her mouth from where she'd bitten her tongue. "Come and take me." The alpha's eyes narrowed, and she saw something like respect flicker in their amber depths. This was no cowering prey animal. This was a fighter who would not go quietly into the darkness. Behind them, the battle raged on. Doc had managed to drive his spear deep into one of the pack members, but the wounded predator's thrashing had knocked him to the ground where two others pounced on him. His screams joined Erg's in a symphony of agony that echoed off the cave walls. The women and children had retreated to the deepest part of the cave, but there was nowhere left to run. The predators had them trapped, and it was only a matter of time before the slaughter was complete. Then Kira saw something that sent a chill down her spine. One of the smaller pack members, a juvenile by its size, was circling around the edge of the combat, moving toward the huddled group of women and children. Its eyes were fixed on little Oma, who clung to her mother with the wide-eyed terror of one too young to understand death, but old enough to fear it. "No!" Kira screamed, abandoning her standoff with the alpha to race toward the juvenile. But the cave floor was slick with blood and scattered weapons, and she slipped, crashing hard against the stone. The world spun as her head struck rock. Through the haze of pain and disorientation, she saw the juvenile predator approaching the children, its jaws beginning to open in anticipation of an easy kill. This was how her bloodline would end, not in glorious battle, but in the screams of innocence being torn apart by monsters. But then something extraordinary happened. The fire, disturbed by all the frantic movement, had spread to a pile of dried brush near the cave entrance. The flames suddenly roared to life, creating a wall of light and heat that caused all the predators to instinctively retreat. In that moment of confusion, Grok did something that would be remembered in the songs of their people for generations to come. The old man grabbed a burning branch from the fire and thrust it at the juvenile's face, forcing the creature to leap backward with a startled yelp. "The fire!" he shouted, his voice cracking with excitement and desperation. "Use the fire!" Kira's vision cleared just in time to see Grok drive the flaming branch toward the juvenile predator's snout. The creature recoiled with a sound somewhere between snarl and a whine, its ancient instincts screaming warnings about the dancing death that had consumed entire forests. Understanding flashed through her like lightning. Fire, their greatest tool, their only advantage. "Everyone!" she screamed, rolling to her feet despite the throbbing pain in her skull. "Grab burning branches!" "Make them back!" Her surviving clanmates responded with desperate speed. Those who could still move snatched flaming wood from the fire, creating a circle of light and heat around the women and children. The predators, caught off guard by this sudden aggression from their prey, retreated toward the cave entrance with uncertain growls. But the alpha was different. Where its packmates showed instinctive fear of the flames, the massive leader stood its ground, amber eyes calculating the new dynamic. This creature had lived long enough to become the apex predator of its territory. It had learned to overcome fear through experience and cunning. "It's not working on the big one," Thok gasped from where he lay bleeding against the cave wall. 3 parallel gashes across his chest leaked crimson life onto the stone floor. "That one's different." Kira could see the truth in his words. The alpha was studying their fire-wielding defense, looking for weaknesses, waiting for the flames to die down or for someone to make a mistake. And worse, she could hear the other pack members regrouping outside the cave mouth, their low rumbles suggesting they were preparing for another coordinated assault. The juvenile that Grok had driven back suddenly darted forward again, testing their defenses. The elder thrust his burning branch at the creature's face, but this time the predator was ready. It twisted aside and snapped at the old man's arm, its teeth barely missing flesh, but close enough that Grok stumbled backward with a cry of alarm. "They're learning," Kira realized with growing horror. "They're figuring out how to get around the fire." The alpha's lips peeled back in that terrible almost smile, as if it understood her words. Then it did something that made every human in the cave freeze with terror. It began to circle the perimeter of their fire defense, moving with patient, methodical precision. It was hunting, not with the wild abandon of a hungry animal, but with the calculated strategy of an intelligent predator that had identified a weakness in its prey's defenses. "The fire's getting smaller," one of the women whispered, her voice tight with panic. Indeed, their desperate grabbing of burning branches had disrupted the main fire, and the flames were beginning to die down. Soon they would be left with only the small torches they held, and those wouldn't last long. Kira's mind raced through their dwindling options. They couldn't maintain the firewall indefinitely. They had nowhere to run, and the predators were adapting to their tactics with terrifying speed. Then she remembered something her grandmother had told her as a child, a story about the old days when their ancestors had first learned to use fire against the shadow beasts. The secret wasn't just having fire, it was knowing how to use it as a weapon. "Rock," she called to the elder, never taking her eyes off the circling alpha. "Remember the old songs? The ones about flame spear hunting?" The old man's weathered face creased with sudden understanding. "The burning hunt," he breathed. "But Kira, we've never tried it against something this large." "We try it, or we die here," she replied grimly. The technique was ancient, dangerous, and required perfect coordination. It involved using fire not just as a deterrent, but as an active weapon-creating spears, and arrows tipped with flame that could drive deep into a predator's hide and continue burning from within. "On my signal," she whispered to her remaining fighters, "target the alpha." All at once. But even as she spoke, she could see the doubt in their eyes. Half her fighters were wounded, exhausted, and terrified. The predators had regrouped and were preparing for another assault. And the fire that represented their only hope was dying with each passing moment. The Alpha suddenly stopped its circling and fixed its burning gaze directly on her. In that moment, she understood with crystal clarity that this creature knew exactly what she was planning. It had been listening, learning, preparing its own counter-strategy. The final phase of the hunt was about to begin. The Alpha struck like lightning made flesh. One moment, it was standing at the edge of their weakening fire circle. The next, it had launched itself forward with explosive power that sent shock waves through the cave floor. Kira barely had time to raise her stone axe before 800 pounds of muscle and fang crashed into her. They tumbled together across the blood-slicked stone, the Alpha's massive weight driving the air from her lungs. Its jaws snapped inches from her face, hot breath reeking of old blood and decay washing over her as she struggled to keep those nightmare teeth away from her throat. Around them, chaos erupted as the rest of the pack charged into the cave. The fire defense collapsed as humans scattered in desperate panic, some dropping their burning branches to flee, others swinging wildly at the shadows that moved between them like death itself. Grok's war cry echoed through the cavern as he drove his flaming spear toward one of the predators, but his age betrayed him. The creature twisted aside and struck him down with a casual swipe of its massive paw. The elder crumpled against the cave wall, his life's blood painting the ancient stone. "No!" Kira screamed, the sound torn from her soul as she watched her mentor fall. Rage flooded through her veins like liquid fire, and she managed to drive her knee upward into the Alpha chest with enough force to momentarily break its grip. She rolled away, gasping for air, her axe somehow still clutched in her trembling hands. The Alpha rose to its full height, towering above her like a monument to predatory perfection. Its amber eyes held no malice, no emotion at all, just the cold calculation of a killer completing its work. Behind the creature, she could see the slaughter unfolding. Thok was down, motionless in a spreading pool of crimson. Two of the women had been cornered by a pair of predators, their terrified screams cutting through the air like knives. Little Oma's mother held the child behind her, a pathetic stone knife shaking in her grip as death approached on silent paws. This was the end. After 6 million years of evolution, her bloodline would die in this cave, food for monsters whose only intelligence lay in their ability to kill. But then something extraordinary happened. From the deepest shadows of the cave came a sound that made even the predators pause a low, rhythmic chanting in the ancient tongue, words so old they seemed carved from the very bones of the earth. It was the death song of their people, the final defiance traditionally sung by warriors facing impossible odds. The voice belonged to little Oma. The child, no more than 3 winters old, stood in the center of the carnage with tears streaming down her face, her tiny voice carrying the ancient words with perfect precision. She shouldn't have known those words. They were meant for warriors, for the dying, for those old enough to understand the weight of sacrifice. But somehow, she knew them. The predators stood frozen, their primitive brains struggling to process this unexpected behavior from their prey. In all their hunting experience, they had never encountered young prey that faced death with song instead of screaming. And in that moment of confusion, Kira saw her chance. The main fire had been scattered by the battle, but several burning branches lay within reach. She grabbed the largest one, its flames licking hungrily at the air, and drove it forward with all her remaining strength toward the Alpha's face. The creature jerked backward, but not quickly enough. The burning wood struck it across the muzzle, and the smell of singed fur filled the air. The Alpha roared a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain and stumbled backward toward the cave entrance. "Now!" Kira screamed to any who could still fight. "Drive them out!" Her remaining clanmates responded with the desperate fury of the doomed. Burning branches became weapons as they pressed forward, forcing the predators to retreat step by step toward the cave mouth. The beasts snarled and snapped but seemed reluctant to face the concentrated fury of the flames. But even as hope began to flicker in Kira's heart, she knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The predators were retreating, not fleeing. They would regroup, wait for the fire to die completely, then return to finish what they had started. Unless she could find a way to end this hunt forever. The alpha, its muzzle still smoking from the burn, fixed her with a gaze that promised retribution. Then it spoke, not the hunting calls from before, but something different, a challenge. A promise that this was far from over. As the predators melted back into the darkness beyond the cave entrance, little Oma's death song finally faded to silence. The child collapsed into her mother's arms, exhausted by forces she couldn't possibly understand. In the sudden quiet, Kira could hear the labored breathing of her surviving clanmates, the soft weeping of the wounded, and something else, a sound that made her blood run cold. More footsteps, approaching from deeper in the canyon. The Alpha's pack wasn't alone. The sound of approaching footsteps multiplied, echoing off the canyon walls like the drumbeat of approaching doom. Kira pressed herself against the cave entrance, straining to count the new arrivals through the darkness. Her heart sank as amber eyes began to appear in the shadows. Not 5 or 6 this time, but dozens. The Alpha's hunting call from earlier hadn't just been communicating with its pack. It had been summoning every predator within miles. How many? Whispered one of the surviving women, her voice barely audible above the growing chorus of growls that filled the night air. Kira didn't answer. There was no point in speaking the truth, that they were now facing what appeared to be every shadow claw in the territory. 30, maybe 40 pairs of those terrible glowing eyes surrounded their cave, a circle of death that stretched beyond the reach of their dying firelight. Behind her, only 5 adults remained capable of fighting, and 3 of those were wounded. Grok lay motionless against the cave wall, his ancient chest barely rising and falling. Little Oma clung to her mother, no longer singing but staring out at the gathering predators with an expression too old for her young face. "We're going to die here," Thok gasped from where he sat propped against a boulder, his chest wounds still seeping crimson life. At least tell me it means something." Kira looked at him, this brave man who had stood with her against impossible odds, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not defeat, though that would have been reasonable. Not despair, though the situation certainly warranted it. Instead, she felt a strange kind of peace, the calm that comes when all pretense is stripped away and only truth remains. "It means everything," she said softly, her words carrying to every person in the cave. 6 million years ago, the first of our kind looked up at the stars and dreamed of something more than just survival. We learned to make fire, to shape tools, to speak words that could carry meaning across the darkness. She turned back to face the gathering predators, her stone axe steady in her hands despite the trembling in her limbs. We learned to love, to protect those weaker than ourselves, to sing songs that outlast our bodies and tell stories that echo through time. We learn to stand together against the darkness, even when that darkness has fangs and claws and eyes that glow like hell itself. The Alpha emerged from the pack, its massive form silhouetted against the stars. Behind it, the other predators began to move forward in a coordinated advance that spoke of perfect hunting discipline. "They're stronger than us," Kira continued, her voice growing louder as the predators approached. "Faster than us. They have weapons we can never match and instincts honed by millions of years of killing." The circle of death tightened. 50 paces, 40, 30. But they don't have what we have. They don't love. They don't dream. They don't look at a small child and see the future of their species written in innocent eyes. They don't stand together when standing means dying, or sing in the face of extinction. She raised her axe above her head, and somehow impossibly, her surviving clanmates found the strength to stand beside her one final time. "They are predators," she shouted, her words echoing through the canyon like a war cry. "But we are human. The alpha's lips peeled back in its terrible smile one last time. Then it charged. But as the wave of death crashed toward them, something miraculous happened. From deep within the cave, deeper than they had ever explored, came an answering roar that shook dust from the ceiling and made every predator freeze in their tracks. The sound was massive, ancient, and filled with a rage that made the Shadow Claw's hunting calls seem like whispers. In the darkness behind them, something was moving. Something that had been sleeping in the depths of the mountain until the sounds of battle had finally awakened it. The alpha, as confident advance faltered as a new scent, reached its sensitive nostrils, the musk of something even older and more dangerous than itself. The perfect hunting formation of the pack wavered as primitive. Instincts screamed warnings about apex predators and territorial boundaries. From the depths of the cave emerged a creature that belonged to an even more ancient world, a cave bear larger than any modern grizzly, with claws like spears and a temperament forged in the crucible of ice ages. It had been hibernating in the deepest chambers when the sounds of the hunt had penetrated its dreams. Now it was awake, angry, and facing a cave full of smaller predators who had invaded its territory. The battle that followed was beyond anything in Kira's wildest nightmares. Titans of the prehistoric world, clashing in a fury of fang and claw while she and her people pressed themselves against the cave walls and watched forces older than civilization tear each other apart. When dawn finally broke over the canyon, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson, the Shadow Claws were gone. Those that had survived the cave bear's wrath had fled into the deep wilderness, carrying with them a new respect for the small creatures who had somehow commanded the loyalty of the mountain as guardian. The great bear itself had disappeared back into the depths, leaving only massive paw prints in the blood-soaked sand as evidence of its intervention. Kira stood at the cave entrance, watching the sun rise over a world that had been forever changed by a single night of terror and courage. Behind her, little Oma began to sing again, not the death song this time, but something new, something that sounded like hope. In the distance, smoke rose from other caves, other fires tended by other survivors who had made it through the darkness. The Shadow Claws had been driven back, but they would return eventually. The cycle of predator and prey would continue, as it always had. But something had changed that night in the depths of the cave. Humanity had faced extinction and chosen to stand rather than kneel. They had discovered that courage could be found in the most unexpected places, in the songs of children, in the sacrifice of elders, in the simple refusal to surrender their dreams to the darkness. As Kira watched the sun climb higher into the sky, she felt a strange certainty settling in her chest. The Shadow Claws would hunt again, and her people would face other trials in the eons to come. But they would endure. They would survive. They would pass down the songs and stories of this night until the words became legend, and the legend became the foundation of something greater than survival. They would become human. And in the end, that would be enough.